Maya screamed, watching helplessly as the heavy branch crashed down, straight toward her daughter, but Shadow reared up, throwing his body between Emma and the falling wood. The limb struck him hard across the back and withers, glancing off his ribs, before rolling harmlessly aside. Emma tumbled backward, mud streaking her arms, eyes wide with shock. For a heartbeat, everything stilled. Emma lay motionless in the mud, Shadow standing over her, sides heaving, nostrils flaring. His body trembled, but he didn't move away. Instead, he lowered his head, pressed his nose to Emma's shoulder, and waited. Maya reached them seconds later, breath ragged, knees buckling as she dropped beside her daughter. "Are you hurt?" Maya's voice was thin, torn between terror and relief. Emma shook her head, tears mixing with rain and grime. "I'm okay. He saved me. Mom, he saved me." Shadow let out a long, shuddering breath. He looked at Maya, eyes wide but steady, his entire being focused on the girl he'd chosen to protect. Maya reached up, brushing her hands down his slick, shaking sides, checking for blood, broken bones, anything. There were bruises, scrapes, but nothing life-threatening. Sarah burst onto the scene, umbrella forgotten, face white as linen. "What happened? Is everyone okay?" Maya nodded, tears streaming down her face, her hands never leaving Emma's arms or Shadow's mane. "He shielded her," Maya whispered, voice thick. He stood over her, like a guardian." The rain tapered off as quickly as it had come. They led Emma and Shadow back to the barn, where Maya and Sarah checked the horse for injuries, towels, and vet supplies at the ready. Shadow stood quietly, flinching only when they pressed on the bruised ribs. Emma, uncharacteristically still, sat beside him, her fingers tangled in his mane. Later, Dr. Carson arrived, raincoat dripping, eyes wide when she saw the marks on Shadow's back. She listened as Emma, voice trembling but clear, told the story, how the horse had leapt into the storm, risking himself to shield her. Dr. Carson examined Shadow, her touch gentle and reassuring. "This is a horse with a warrior's soul," she said, voice low and awed. "He chose you, Emma. You and your family. That's rare in animals, or people." Emma wept into Shadow's mane, her body shaking with aftershocks of fear and relief. Maya pressed her forehead to Emma's, holding her close, feeling the truth settle in her bones. Shadow had been rescued, but tonight he'd become the rescuer. Their fates were intertwined by more than chance. It was trust, loyalty, and love, the kind that defied logic, time, and even danger. For the next several days, Emma rarely left Shadow's side. She skipped television and games to sit in the barn, whispering thanks, stroking his battered ribs, feeding him apple slices she'd tucked into her pockets. Shadow's injuries healed slowly, but the bond between girl and horse deepened into something fierce and unbreakable. On the first cloudless evening after the storm, Maya sat outside the stall, watching Emma braid bright ribbons into Shadow's mane. The barn was filled with laughter again, laughter that hadn't echoed there since her father died, since Raven's loss. Maya realized, with a kind of wonder, that she'd been wrong about the nature of healing. It didn't mean erasing pain or hiding scars. It meant standing in the storm together, choosing over and over to reach for hope. She pressed her palm to Shadow's muzzle, feeling the warmth of his breath and the steady thump of his heart. "Thank you," Maya whispered, the words carrying all her gratitude, awe, and the first real peace she'd felt in years. Above them, the last rays of sun flickered across the paddock, and for a fleeting moment, the world was whole, bruised perhaps, but braver, and forever changed. The weeks after the storm brought a subtle but powerful transformation to the Turner household. Shadow's act of courage had rippled through the family in ways none of them could have predicted. Emma, still recovering from the terror and awe of being saved, began to see Shadow not only as a friend, but as a silent protector, a creature whose loyalty was proven in the thunder and rain. Word of Shadow's heroics spread among neighbors and friends. Emma's story, how a black horse shielded her from a falling branch, circulated at school, in the local market, even at the veterinary clinic. People stopped by the fence just to catch a glimpse of the guardian horse, and some left apples or carrots as tokens of gratitude and admiration. A few families, whose children had once been afraid of horses, now visited just to watch Shadow graze or see Emma brush his mane. She spoke aloud, more to herself than the horse. "I think you're home now." Shadow watched her, ears flicking, as if he understood every word. Emma joined her, running across the grass, giggling as Shadow nibbled at her hair. "He's so different, Mom. He doesn't jump at loud noises anymore. He waits for me at the bus stop in the mornings, like he's guarding the family." Maya smiled. "He's watching over all of us." They lingered in the paddock, sharing quiet stories as the sky turned indigo. Sarah called them in for dinner, but Maya stayed a moment longer, kneeling beside Shadow, arms wrapped gently around his neck. For the first time, Shadow lowered his head into her lap and let out a deep, contented sigh. The sound rumbled through Maya's bones. A peace she'd forgotten was possible. She stroked his cheek, feeling the soft breath of his trust. In that moment, surrounded by the scent of grass and horse and coming night, Maya let go of the last of her fear. She understood, finally, that loving again didn't erase old pain. It transformed it, weaving sorrow and hope together until they were one and the same. In the weeks that followed, Shadow's transformation was impossible to ignore. He no longer lingered in the background, unsure of his place. Instead, he became the anchor of the Turner household. He greeted Emma at the bus stop every morning, stood quietly by Sarah when she weeded the garden, pressed his nose to Maya's shoulder on her hardest days. Even the neighbors noticed. Children stopping at the fence to feed him clover, old friends dropping by with apples and stories from long ago. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Emma lifted her glass of milk. "To Shadow Turner," she declared, eyes shining. "The best thing that ever happened to us." Maya laughed, her heart light. She reached across the table, squeezing Sarah's hand, watching the flicker of candlelight in her daughter's hair. She realized then that every loss, every fracture, had led them here to this improbable, beautiful moment. Later that night, Maya walked out to the paddock one last time before bed. She found Shadow grazing in the moonlight, the name on his halter glinting softly. She knelt beside him, pressing her cheek to his neck. "You're home, old friend," she whispered. Shadow, for the first time, leaned fully into her, all his weight surrendered in trust. And in that silent communion, Maya knew that, for both of them, acceptance had finally arrived. Not as an end, but as the true beginning of something new. A thick July heat pressed over the city, turning the air into something heavy and close, humming with the distant threat of another summer thunderstorm. The Turner house buzzed with its own restless energy, Emma's laughter echoing up from the kitchen as she quizzed for an upcoming biology test, Sarah humming an old country tune while folding laundry, Maya at the table sketching out the week's nurse shifts on the back of an envelope. Outside, Shadow stood in the paddock, flicking flies with his tail, his new halter glinting in the sun. To any outsider, he looked like he'd belonged there forever, a sturdy black gelding, watchful and proud, at home in his small green kingdom. Yet Maya knew better. There were scars beneath that glossy coat, places that would never quite smooth out. By late afternoon, clouds rolled in over the treetops, purple and swollen with promise. The air snapped cool. The barn swayed and creaked with the coming storm. Emma, bored with study, darted out into the yard. "Just going to walk the fence, Mom," she called, arms windmilling. Maya, distracted, barely glanced up, just enough to see her daughter slip around the barn, hair flying. The wind kicked up, rattling the leaves, bending the tall grasses. Maya's heart thumped faster. Something felt off. She went to the window, eyes darting to the paddock where Shadow grazed with his head low, only to see Emma running along the fence line, her ponytail snapping behind her. A crack of thunder split the sky. A streak of lightning ripped open the clouds. Rain fell, sharp and sudden. Emma's cry cut through the roar, high, panicked, impossible to ignore. Maya's blood iced. She sprinted from the kitchen, crashing through the porch door, socks slipping on the wet boards. She could see Emma now, caught at the edge of the paddock, one foot tangled in a fallen branch, the other skidding in the mud. A thick limb, snapped by the wind, teetered high overhead, about to crash down. The world seemed to slow. Shadow, usually wary of sudden noises, jerked his head up, ears pinned. In that instant, something changed. He lunged across the paddock, a black blur against the bruised sky. His hooves thudded through the muck, ignoring the rain, the thunder, the instinct to flee from chaos. He barreled toward Emma, sliding to a stop just as the limb broke loose, tumbling downward in a tangle of leaves and bark. Later that night, Maya sat by Shadow's stall, the old pain easing just a little. She thought of all the things this horse had survived, the cruelty, the escape, the lonely nights in the park. She wondered how many times he'd lain awake, listening for footsteps that never came, haunted by the memory of hands that hurt instead of healed. She dug out an old blanket from Raven's trunk and draped it over Shadow's back. "This was hers," Maya whispered, "but you need it more." Shadow stood quietly, accepting the gift. For the first time, Maya let herself hope. Not just for him, but for herself, for Emma, for the kind of healing that could take root in battered ground. That night, as the storm raged outside, Maya stayed in the barn, reading her father's letters by flashlight, Shadow's slow breathing steady behind her. She read about resilience, about how real courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to keep going. She thought about all the fractures, old and new, that might never fully close, and about the strength it took to live with them. Outside, the storm finally broke, and silence fell, a peace hard-won, delicate, and deeply real. The rain had swept the city clean. For a day and a half, puddles glistened on the Turner property, mirroring the patchwork sky. By the time sunlight returned, the barnyard grass was a tender green, and the world felt washed of something heavy. Shadow, his coat slick and black as oil, shook out the dampness and nickered each time Emma stepped outside with a treat. Inside the kitchen, the mood was brighter. Emma made a habit of eating her cereal at the window, spoon pausing mid-air to watch Shadow pace the paddock. Sarah brewed coffee, humming, her face less tense than it had been in months. Maya, energized by the storm's passing, set out a new to-do list on the fridge. The name at the top, Shadow, felt less like an accident and more like a declaration. He belonged, whether they'd planned it or not. But something else needed to change. For all his progress, Shadow was still an outsider in small ways, a guest in a borrowed barn, a creature marked by old wounds and borrowed hope. Emma was the first to voice it over dinner, twirling spaghetti around her fork. "He needs his own halter," she said. "Not the frayed rope from the tack box. Something new. Something with his name." Sarah grinned, pulling out her phone. "Why don't we order one together?" The three of them scrolled through endless options, leather, nylon, every color of the rainbow, arguing gently about what would suit him best. In the end, they picked a sturdy navy blue halter with shadow turner embroidered in crisp white along the cheekpiece. Emma clapped, delighted. Now he's really one of us. While they waited for the package to arrive, Maya took on a different ritual. She opened Raven's old memory chest, a battered trunk at the foot of her bed, filled with horse show ribbons, faded photos, and the bridle her mare had worn on her last ride. For months, Maya couldn't bear to touch any of it. But now she found herself folding the bridle with careful hands, tucking away old sadness like a letter finally read. She placed it at the back of the chest, behind the things she was ready to let go of, but never forget. The new halter arrived on a Thursday afternoon, the box set carefully on the porch by the mail carrier. Emma was home first, tearing open the package with the giddy reverence usually reserved for birthday gifts. "Mom! Sarah! It's here!" She ran to the barn, Shadow following the sound of her voice, ears pricked in curiosity. Maya met her at the gate, Sarah trailing behind with her phone out, ready to capture the moment. Emma held out the halter, letting Shadow sniff it. He eyed it warily, then nudged Emma's hand, as if giving permission. "Ready, buddy?" Maya asked, voice low. She slipped the halter gently over his nose, fastening the buckle with steady hands. The embroidery shone in the afternoon sun. Shadow turner. For a heartbeat, the world stilled. Shadow didn't flinch, didn't back away. Instead, he stood quietly, the weight of the new halter settling over him like a benediction. Sarah snapped a photo. Emma, grinning, Shadow calm and regal in his new halter. Maya's hand on his withers. For the first time, the barn felt truly full, a family picture with nothing missing. That evening, Maya went to the barn alone. She opened the memory chest one last time, running her fingers over Raven's old bridle, then closing the lid with a sense of gentle finality. She set the key on her nightstand, the past no longer an anchor, but a stepping stone. Out in the paddock, dusk painted everything in soft gold. Maya found Shadow waiting by the fence, eyes deep and reflective. She brought out a handful of carrots, feeding him slowly, her mind a swirl of gratitude and new beginnings. "Of course it is," Maya replied, squeezing Emma's shoulder. "It's okay to feel everything. The sadness, the joy, the fear, and the hope. The trick is not to close yourself off, not to let pain turn into bitterness. Instead, let it remind you how much you're capable of loving." Emma reached down, picked up a small stone and tossed it into the creek. "For your old sadness," she whispered to Shadow. Maya picked up her own stone. "And for mine." The ripples spread out, merging and multiplying, until they vanished into the current. Shadow nudged both of them, pressing his head between their shoulders. It was a small gesture, but in that moment, it felt enormous. A wordless acknowledgement of everything they'd shared, survived, and become together. As the sky deepened toward dusk, Maya found herself thinking about all the lessons Shadow had brought into their lives. Not just about horses or healing, but about the simple, stubborn hope that could grow from broken ground. She remembered the first night in the park, her hands shaking as she reached for a stranger in the mist. The old fear, the old grief, the moment she almost turned away. If she had, none of this would exist. The laughter, the healing, the community, the love. Back at the barn, they gathered as a family. Sarah joining them by the fence, the three women and their remarkable horse framed in the warm glow of lantern light. Sarah set down a tray of cocoa, and together they watched Shadow graze, the golden leaves drifting around him, the world impossibly still. I keep thinking, Sarah said softly, that we needed Shadow as much as he needed us. Maybe more. Maya nodded. Sometimes the truest healers don't come with answers. They just show up, stay beside you, and let you find your way. Shadow was like that. He didn't fix our lives. He just made us brave enough to live them. Emma grinned, setting her mug down. Do you think other people will find their own shadow? I hope so, Maya said, her voice thick with gratitude. I hope anyone who hears our story remembers that you don't have to be perfect, or unscarred, or strong all the time. You just have to keep reaching out, keep loving, even when it's hard. They stood together, 3 hands resting on Shadow's broad back, the moment stretching out into forever. As darkness gathered, Maya's thoughts turned outward, to those listening, to anyone who might be walking through their own lonely night. Waiting for a sign of hope, her voice, soft but steady, rose in the hush. You don't have to walk alone. Somewhere out there, another soul waits for patience, not rescue. Sometimes the greatest healers gallop in on 4 hooves, or maybe they arrive in a way you never expect. If our story moved you, share it. Let hope ripple outward, because love, when given freely, always finds its way home. Shadow lifted his head to the sky, the wind tugging at his mane, the last lesson shining in his eyes. Wounds, whether on flesh or spirit, can become the strongest parts of us if we dare to share them. And healing in the end is never just about being rescued. It's about rescuing others again and again in the simple language of presence, patience, and love. As the lantern light flickered and the night deepened, the Turners lingered together, hearts light and whole. And out in the quiet fields, Shadow, once lost and broken, stood as their silent testament to hope, to healing, and to the enduring, unstoppable power of love. At the edge of the paddock, Maya spotted a man she didn't recognize. His face drawn and tired, his eyes lingering on Shadow with a kind of yearning. She walked over, introducing herself. He explained that he'd lost his job, his marriage, and was struggling to stay afloat. I read about Shadow online, he admitted, voice shaking. I guess I just needed to see if it was true, if hope like that was real. Maya smiled gently. It's real, but it's not always easy. Healing doesn't mean we don't still hurt. It means we let the pain become a reason to care, about ourselves and about others. Shadow ambled over, brushing his nose against the man's arm. The man blinked, then smiled, a tear sliding down his cheek. For a moment, the world was reduced to this: a battered soul, a gentle horse, and the quiet certainty that tomorrow could be better than today. As the event wound down, Maya gathered her family by the barn, wrapping an arm around Emma and Sarah. She looked at Shadow standing quietly, a living symbol of what it meant to survive and to give. Emma leaned close, whispering, I think Shadow knew all along he was meant for this. Maya nodded, her heart full. He didn't just find us, Em. He found everyone who needed him, and now he's helping them find themselves. In the days and weeks that followed, the center became a haven. Families found support, friends formed where before there was only loneliness, and the story of the black horse who rescued a city grew into a legend. The local newspaper ran a story about Shadow's meadow, and donations flooded in, ensuring that anyone in need could come, ride, heal, regardless of their ability to pay. At home on quiet evenings, Maya would sit on the porch, watching Shadow graze as Emma wrote poems and Sarah tended the garden. The pain of the past had not vanished, but it had changed shape, no longer something to hide, but something to honor. Their scars, like shadows, became maps of where they'd been and proof of how far they'd come. True healing, Maya realized, didn't mean the absence of pain. It meant turning pain into a bridge, reaching out across the distance, finding hands to hold, and allowing hope to ripple outward, touching lives they'd never even met. Shadow, once left behind, now led the way. Not as a miracle, but as a living reminder, every scar has a story, and some stories, when shared, can heal the world. Late autumn crept in with its hush of golden leaves, softening the city's edges and laying a gentle peace across Shadow's meadow. The air was crisp, rich with the scent of hay and wood smoke, and the world seemed to slow, letting everyone breathe in a little deeper, hold each other a little closer. For Maya, Emma, and Sarah, it was a season of reflection, a time to look back at the journey they'd taken, and the remarkable way a wounded black horse had stitched their family and their hearts back together. One Sunday afternoon, under a sky streaked with amber and rose, Maya and Emma walked slowly down the trail that skirted the creek. Shadow ambled beside them, his stride a little stiffer now, the old wounds and years catching up at last. His mane, still black and proud, fluttered in the cool breeze. The world felt both fragile and eternal, time folding in on itself as past and present danced together. Emma bent to pick up a handful of leaves, tossing them into the air. "He's getting old, Mom," she said quietly. "Do you think he's happy?" Maya smiled, her hand resting on Shadow's thick neck. "I think he's the happiest he's ever been, and I think he's taught us how to be happy too, even when it's hard." Shadow paused at the edge of the creek, lowering his head to sniff at the water. The sun's reflection glimmered across his face, highlighting the scars on his muzzle, the healed places on his back. Emma stepped closer, kneeling by Shadow's side, her hand gentle against his jaw. Maya joined her, both women grounding themselves in the warmth and solidity of the horse who had given them so much. The three of them sat in silence, watching the creek tumble over stones, the leaves swirling in its current. Maya broke the quiet, her voice low and sure. "You know, there was a time I thought I'd never heal, that the pain of losing Raven, of losing Dad, would follow me forever. I thought I had to bury that pain, pretend it didn't exist. But I was wrong." Emma looked up, curious. "What changed?" Maya smiled. "Shadow. He didn't try to hide his scars. He carried them every day. He didn't run from the past, but he didn't let it decide his future either. He showed me that you don't have to erase the pain. You can walk through it and still find joy on the other side." Emma considered this, her fingers brushing through Shadow's mane. "So it's okay to be sad sometimes." Shadow took to his new role as if born for it. He stood patiently while nervous children stroked his mane, and he lowered his head for adults fighting tears as they rested trembling hands against his powerful shoulders. The more time he spent with people, the gentler he seemed to become, an anchor, a silent healer, offering peace and comfort in a language older than words. For the first time since her father died, Maya felt hope burning in her chest, a hope bigger than her own healing, a hope that might reach anyone willing to meet the gaze of a brave black horse named Shadow. And each night, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, Maya would watch her daughter and their remarkable horse in the paddock, the laughter and soft voices rising into the cooling air. Shadow, once abandoned and broken, had not only been rescued, he'd become a rescuer himself, guiding them and all who came close, gently back toward the light. 6 months had passed since the first morning Maya found Shadow in the mist at Freedom Park. A short span of time measured in seasons, but a lifetime for hearts once closed to hope. The once abandoned barn was now alive with the rhythm of new beginnings, the scrape of rakes, the laughter of children, the gentle snort of horses waiting their turn to walk the long oval of the city's first therapeutic riding center. A crisp autumn sun shone down on Shadow's meadow, the name gleaming in bronze on a plaque by the gate. Below it, in Maya's handwriting, a simple inscription: "For those who walk in darkness, may you find the courage to return to the light." A crowd had gathered for the grand opening: parents, volunteers, neighbors, and strangers who'd heard stories of the black horse who rescued a girl and became a beacon for the lost. Maya stood near the podium, one hand resting on Shadow's neck, the other clutching a folder of notes for her speech. She was nervous. She'd always preferred the quiet work of care and mending to the spotlight. But looking out at the faces in the crowd, Emma's wide, proud grin, Sarah's reassuring nod, Mrs. Patel's quiet tears, she felt her own courage steady. The microphone crackled. Maya cleared her throat. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice soft but clear. "When I first found Shadow, I thought I was saving him. But as many of you know, he saved me and my family right back. We were broken in our own ways, grieving, lonely, unsure if we could ever love again without losing everything. Shadow didn't fix our pain. He didn't erase the scars. What he did was teach us that healing isn't about forgetting or pretending we're not hurt. It's about showing up every day and letting the scars become bridges instead of barriers." A hush settled over the crowd, the quiet deepened by the soft sound of Shadow's breath. Emma stepped forward, holding a piece of paper, her hands trembling just a little. She looked up at Shadow, who nudged her gently as if to give her strength. Then she read, "You listened to my silence. You walked me home. In the darkest storm, you stood by me and made me brave to face it alone." Tears shimmered in Emma's eyes. She pressed her cheek to Shadow's mane as the crowd applauded. Maya saw Mrs. Patel comforting her son Rahul, who waved shyly at Shadow, and old Mr. Green, the widower, standing straight-backed and proud by the fence. After the speeches, families lined up to share their stories. A woman told of her daughter, who'd struggled with anxiety so severe she could barely leave the house, until the day Shadow stood by her, motionless, letting her braid his mane for nearly an hour. A teenage boy with autism explained, in simple but profound words, how Shadow had taught him it was okay to be different, to be quiet, to take his time. Even Sarah took a turn, her voice catching as she described watching Maya and Emma return to laughter, to living, because of a horse no one else wanted. Maya watched as these stories flowed together, a patchwork of loss and hope, of wounds shared and burdens made lighter. She realized that Shadow's scars, like hers, were not marks of shame, but badges of survival. Every person who touched him seemed to find something they'd lost. A moment of calm, a sense of belonging, a reminder that they were not alone. The sun moved across the sky, shadows stretching over the ring as children took turns leading Shadow and the other horses around the track. Therapists guided veterans through gentle exercises, their stiff postures softening as the horses matched their pace. A group of mothers, arms linked, wiped tears as they watched their children laugh and ride for the first time. Shadow's presence at home grew even more central. He started waiting at the edge of the yard when Emma left for school, standing still and watchful until the yellow bus disappeared around the bend. Every afternoon, as the bus rumbled back down the road, Shadow would be there, ears forward, as if counting the minutes until Emma's return. The bond between girl and horse had become something visible, palpable, like a living bridge over the scars they both carried. Maya noticed changes in herself as well. There were still tough days at the hospital, Long shifts, anxious patience, the persistent ache of old grief that sometimes crept in when she least expected it. Yet each time she came home, Shadow was there. Some evenings, after especially hard days, Maya would wander out to the paddock before even going inside. She'd lean against Shadow's sturdy frame, feeling the warmth radiate through his coat, letting his quiet presence settle her nerves and slow her racing thoughts. Sarah, too, found unexpected comfort in Shadow's company. On weekends, she'd bring her gardening gloves and a bucket of carrots, sitting quietly in the sun as Shadow grazed nearby. The horse's calm seemed to soften Sarah's own worries, giving her a place to breathe, to just be. But Shadow's healing reach soon extended beyond the Turner family. One hot afternoon, Maya heard a knock at the door. It was Mrs. Patel from next door, her eyes red-rimmed with worry. "Maya, can I ask a favor?" she whispered. "My son, Rahul. He had another seizure. I found him lying by the fence and—" Shadow was with him. He stood right there, nose pressed to Rahul's cheek, until I came running. It was like he wouldn't let Rahul be alone. Maya's chest tightened. She remembered her own father's words. Sometimes the right creature finds you when you need them most. She hugged Mrs. Patel and offered her tea, promising to keep Shadow nearby any time Rahul wanted company. Word spread, and soon others reached out. A widowed grandfather, struggling with loneliness, found comfort in simply watching Shadow from his porch. A shy teenager, new to the neighborhood, started coming by after school, sitting by the fence and sketching Shadow's profile in a battered notebook. Even the mail carrier admitted she planned her route just so she could toss Shadow an extra apple on her rounds. One morning, Maya received an envelope in the mailbox, a homemade thank you card, covered in crayon horseshoes and bright blue letters. "Thank you, Shadow, for watching over us." Inside was a note from Mrs. Patel, expressing her gratitude and marveling at the peace her son felt just by being close to the big black horse. These stories kindled something new in Maya. She began to wonder, was there more they could do? If Shadow had become such a source of comfort for their family, perhaps he could offer that same healing to others. Maya spent late nights researching therapy horses, reading articles and testimonials about equine-assisted therapy for anxiety, PTSD, autism, and trauma. One Saturday, Maya broached the idea at breakfast, pouring coffee for Sarah and sliding a printout across the table. "What if we tried to get Shadow certified as a therapy horse?" she asked, voice tentative but hopeful. "I know he's special, and the way people are drawn to him, it's not just luck." Sarah smiled, reaching across the table to squeeze Maya's hand. "I think it's a wonderful idea. He saved us, Maya. Maybe he's meant to save others too." Emma was all in, of course. "He can help so many people, Mom. He helped me. He makes me brave." The next week was a flurry of emails and phone calls. Maya contacted a local therapeutic riding center, explained Shadow's story, and scheduled an assessment with a certified equine therapist. She worried about the process. Would Shadow, once so skittish and wary, tolerate new people and situations? But as always, Shadow surprised her. He met the therapist with cautious curiosity, standing steady while strangers patted his neck and whispered praise. He flinched at sudden movements, but always returned, nose quivering, searching for the comfort of a gentle hand. The therapist was impressed. "You've got a rare one here," she said, smiling as Shadow leaned into her touch. "Not every horse has the heart for this work." But Shadow, he listens, he waits, he wants to help. As Shadow began his journey toward certification, the Turner family rallied around him. Emma volunteered at the riding center on weekends, learning about horse care and helping younger children build confidence with Shadow by their side. Maya attended workshops, reading everything she could about animal therapy, eager to understand how they might turn Shadow's gift into something lasting for others. It was the hour before sunrise when the city still clung to its secrets, and the world felt suspended between dreams and the coming day. Freedom Park, Charlotte, lay shrouded in a cool spring mist, the grass jeweled with dew and the old benches standing silent, empty, as if waiting for someone brave enough to greet the dawn. Maya Turner's sneakers thudded softly against the asphalt path as she ran, her breath clouding in the air. She was alone, or so she thought. She preferred these quiet hours, before her phone buzzed with the needs of patients, before her partner or daughter even stirred, before the memories could catch up and drag her down. She slowed by the pond, listening to the distant calls of robins, then suddenly, hoofbeats. Not the rhythmic clip-clop of a carriage or the measured trot of a police mount, but frantic, erratic pounding, raw, desperate. Her pulse quickened. She stopped, scanning the mist. A black shape burst from the fog, a horse, wild-eyed, caked in mud, nostrils flaring, mane tangled and flying. He moved with a limping gait, a shadow cut loose from another world. Maya's heart slammed in her chest. For a split second, she almost screamed. She had grown up around horses, her father's ranch outside Charlotte, long since sold. But this was nothing like the gentle old geldings she'd known as a girl. The stallion slowed, sides heaving, foam flecked at his lips. He had no halter, no brand, nothing but the marks of fear. His left foreleg dragged, as if every step cost him. Maya's first instinct was to back away, to let the animal vanish into the city's waking streets. But she stood frozen, hands clenched at her sides. She hadn't touched a horse since Raven, her own black mare, gone just last year after a sudden illness. That loss still throbbed under her skin. She'd sworn never to get close again. But this animal was suffering. He spun in a circle, whinnied, a raw, guttural sound that echoed through the empty park. Maya's eyes stung. She thought of Raven's last hours, the fever, the desperate search for a vet, her daughter Emma's silent tears. The horse stumbled, legs folding beneath him. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. Then he collapsed onto the grass, sides shuddering. Maya felt the old pain rise inside her, hot and sharp. She took a shaky step forward. "Hey," she whispered, voice trembling. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." He flinched as she knelt beside him, mud soaking through her leggings. Up close she could see the old scars on his flank, the half-healed whip marks crossing his back. Her hands hovered over his trembling body. "God, what happened to you?" she murmured. No answer, but a ragged, shuddering breath. He rolled a single eye toward her, dark, rimmed with fear and exhaustion. Slowly she reached out, laying her hand on his mane. He jerked, then miraculously didn't bolt. Maya began to stroke his neck, gentle and slow, the way her father taught her long ago. "Let them feel your heartbeat," he used to say. "Let them know you're real." The stallion's breath slowed, his panic softening just enough. He pressed his heavy head into her knee, like a drowning man finding driftwood. For a long moment, Maya forgot everything. The city, her grief, the ache in her chest. Here was a life, abandoned in the dark, asking for nothing but a touch. She glanced around. No other joggers, no headlights, no one coming. She fumbled for her phone, thumb hovering over the contacts list. Should she call animal control? Was she supposed to just leave him here? He twitched under her hand, a soft, hopeless sound escaping his throat. In that instant, Maya's resolve flickered. She almost walked away, almost left him for someone else to find. But then, with a shudder, the horse let out a deep, exhausted sigh, leaning fully into her. She felt the warm weight of his head, and, for a heartbeat, the raw trust of a wounded creature who had nothing left to give but this, a surrender. The eastern sky began to pale, streaks of orange and pink creeping over the city. The world grew brighter, but the space between Maya and the horse remained quiet, suspended in the hush of shared suffering. She wiped at her eyes, unsure if the moisture on her cheeks was mist or tears. "All right," she whispered, her voice steadier now. "You're not alone. Not anymore." As the city came awake, cars humming, birds chattering, the first footsteps crunching on gravel, Maya stayed kneeling in the grass, one hand stroking the trembling horse, the other pressed against her own heart. She knew, deep down, that everything had just changed, though she couldn't say how. All she knew was she could not leave, and as the first rays of sunlight broke over the trees, painting the world in gold, Maya made her silent promise. Whatever happened next, this wild, broken horse would not face it alone. The sun had barely crested the rooftops by the time Maya finally forced herself to stand, her knees stiff and damp from the grass. The horse, still nothing but a trembling shadow in her arms, looked up, eyes wide with uncertainty. Maya fumbled for her phone, heart pounding as she dialed the city's animal control line. Her voice shook. "Yes, there's a horse, loose at Freedom Park. No, not a police horse. No, I'm not sure where he came from." The dispatcher sounded just as bewildered. "Ma'am, we don't get calls like this. We have protocols for dogs, cats, sometimes goats, never a full-grown horse." Maya bit back frustration. "He's hurt. He was abandoned. He's got no brand, no halter. Can someone come?" "I can send a patrol car to look, but they aren't equipped for livestock. Maybe call a vet. Or a local rescue." By the time she hung up, she felt like screaming. She tried the nearest animal hospital, but their mobile vet was already out on another emergency. "We'll call you when we can," they promised. "Just keep him calm." As if that was easy. The horse, mud-stained, shaking, unsure, refused to stand. Maya stroked his neck, whispering the same soothing nothings she'd once used for Emma as a crying baby. She thought of her late father's old barn on the city's edge, abandoned since he passed, its stalls empty, hay long gone dry. Maybe, no. She wasn't ready for this, but the horse didn't give her a choice. With a shudder, he tried to rise, nearly fell again, then managed to stand, favoring his left front leg. She noticed for the first time there were old whip scars on his flanks, thin lines under the mud. Rage and heartbreak twisted together in her gut. Hands shaking, she snapped a photo of the horse, capturing his wild, haunted eyes. She texted it to her daughter Emma and her partner Sarah, with just 3 words, "Found him here." Almost instantly, Emma replied, "He's beautiful. Maybe he found you for a reason." Maya nearly dropped her phone. The words hit her hard, flooding her with memories. Her father's laugh in the barn, Raven's last soft breath, Emma's arms around her waist that awful night. She stared at the trembling horse, feeling the full weight of what she was about to do. By mid-morning, she'd borrowed an old livestock trailer from a neighbor who stared at her as if she'd lost her mind. "You sure about this, Maya? You haven't touched a horse since, well, you know." Maya only nodded, not trusting herself to speak. With effort, she coaxed the horse into the trailer. He balked, then followed, as if he sensed this was the only way. His trust startled her. It was brittle but real. The drive to her late father's property was quiet, her knuckles white on the wheel. She glanced in the rearview mirror every few seconds, checking on her passenger. Each time she caught his wild gaze, as if he still couldn't believe he'd been rescued. The barn itself was musty and cold, dust motes swirling in sunbeams. Maya opened the trailer door, murmuring softly, "Easy, boy, easy." The horse limped down the ramp and into the main stall, standing frozen for a long moment, nostrils flaring, ears twitching at every sound. Maya's own breath caught. She half expected to see her father, leaning on the gate, a bemused smile on his face. Emma and Sarah arrived minutes later, sneakers crunching on gravel. Emma's eyes shone as she approached, hands out, gentle. "He's so scared," she whispered. Sarah wrapped an arm around Maya's waist. "We'll need to call the vet." The hours blurred together. The vet, a gray-haired woman named Dr. Carson, arrived late in the afternoon, her eyes scanning the horse with practiced concern. "He's young, maybe 3, 4 years old. He's hungry, dehydrated, but nothing broken. These scars, though," she shook her head. "No microchip, no brand. It's like he dropped out of thin air." Emma stood silent in the corner, clutching a blanket. Sarah fetched buckets of water and old towels. Maya hovered, torn between relief and dread. She wanted to do right by this horse, but she couldn't shake the memory of Raven. How loving something so much could end in heartbreak. Dr. Carson packed away her supplies, grim. "If no one claims him, the city will send him to auction. You know what that means. Most unclaimed horses end up shipped out for slaughter. If you want to foster him, even temporarily, you'll need to file paperwork." Maya's heart hammered in her chest. "We'll keep him here," she said, voice cracking, "just until we find his owner." Dr. Carson gave a small, sad smile. "You might have just saved his life." That night, Maya sat in the barn, knees drawn to her chest, listening to the horse, still nameless, pace restlessly in the stall. Wind rattled the tin roof. Emma's laughter floated in from the house, muffled but comforting. Maya glanced at the old tack box in the corner. Her father's handwriting still marked the lid. For Raven, always. She dug through old letters, yellowed and frayed, reading her father's advice about healing and letting go. She heard his voice in her mind. "Every creature that comes to you comes for a reason. You don't get to choose what you rescue or who, but you do get to choose if you stay." Outside, the horse stopped pacing. Maya stood, heart aching, and stepped to the stall gate. He looked at her, ears flicking. She held out her palm. He lowered his head, breathing her in. For a moment, all the noise of the world faded. Just Maya, the smell of hay and horse sweat, the memories of a father lost and a horse that needed her, if only for a night. Maya stroked his nose, the old fear and new hope warring inside her. "We'll find your owner, okay?" she whispered. "You're safe now. Just until—" The horse let out a low, tired breath, pressing his forehead to her open hand. The gesture was tentative but full of longing, a silent plea for shelter, for something like home. Maya stayed with him until her legs cramped, only leaving when the first stars blinked through the barn window. As she turned to go, she looked back one last time. The horse watched her, eyes steady, as if daring her to break her promise. Long after the lights were out and the house was still, Maya lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind and the uncertain, hopeful sound of hoofbeats in her dreams. The first true spring mornings settled over Charlotte, with sunlight spilling through the old barn's broken window panes, chasing away the lingering cold. Life, both new and quietly stubborn, seemed to gather in every corner. Spiders weaving fresh webs in the rafters, sparrows chirping above the hayloft, and the sound of hooves shifting over straw as the black horse, still unnamed, tested the limits of trust. Each dawn, Maya would slip out before the rest of the city awoke, drawn by the hollow anxiety that rattled her bones all night. The barn became her sanctuary, a place apart from grief, the world, and the relentless clock of hospital shifts. Sometimes, she arrived to find Emma already there, sitting cross-legged outside the stall, phone flashlight propped on her knee as she quietly read aloud. "Just so he knows he's not alone," Emma would say, voice gentle, as if explaining the logic of children and horses to the universe. Maya noticed a pattern emerging. Each morning, as the first blush of sunlight crawled across the paddock, the horse would rise and step quietly to Emma's window, head cocked, waiting for the sound of voices and laughter. He seemed to recognize Emma's footsteps, the shuffle of sneakers in dew, the unmistakable tone of her "Good morning, handsome." Maya watched, caught between wonder and disbelief. Her daughter had never been so consistent about chores in her life. One morning, as Maya gently brushed mud and dried sweat from the horse's side, Emma lingered in the doorway, backpack slung carelessly over one shoulder. "He's waiting for me every day," Emma said, half laughing, half serious. "Like he's guarding my window." She fished an apple from her bag, slicing it into neat pieces, offering one from her open palm. The horse's lips fluttered, warm breath tickling Emma's hand before he took the slice with surprising delicacy. Sarah joined them on weekends, a mug of coffee warming her hands, her face bright with a smile that Maya hadn't seen in months. Together, the three women watched the horse change, not in dramatic leaps, but in slow, accumulating moments. He learned to tolerate the brush, then the gentle tug of a lead rope. His ribs, once sharp and ghostly beneath his skin, began to fill out with a soft roundness. The anxious, rolling whites of his eyes faded, replaced by a quiet wariness. Still, there were things Maya couldn't explain. The horse was oddly protective of an old, fraying lead rope they found buried at the bottom of the tack box. When Maya tried to move it, he'd nicker and nose it back into his corner, standing over it with a stubborn pride. She ran her thumb over the faded letters stitched into the rope. RJ. It meant nothing to her, but she sensed it was a lifeline to the horse's past, a connection as mysterious as it was unbreakable. In the slow hours of the evening, Maya would sit outside the stall, knees hugged to her chest, and talk softly about the things she never shared. Not with Sarah, not even with Emma. She told him about Raven, about losing her father, about the ache that never really went away. The horse listened, ears twitching, gaze steady and unjudging, as if he alone understood the shape of grief that made Maya a little more invisible each day. Emma, restless as ever, zipped up her jacket and hopped on her bike. "I'll ride the path down by the woods before the rain really starts," she called, voice bright. Maya nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Stay close and don't be long," she called back. But Emma was already out of earshot, the wheels of her bike singing on wet gravel. Shadow stood in the paddock, mane tossing in the growing wind. He paced the fence line, tail swishing, senses tuned to something Maya couldn't see. There was a tension in him today, some animal restlessness, as if he were reading the weather or waiting for a sign. Maya watched him through the window, pen hovering above the empty page. She wanted to write about hope, about the slow return of laughter in her house, but grief clung stubbornly to her words, shaping them into old wounds. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Maya's hand shook as she scribbled half a sentence. Sometimes silence is the loudest reminder of what's lost. She stopped, pressing the pen to her lips. The memories crowded in. The night Raven died. The phone calls, the panic, the helplessness. The barn, too quiet. The world suddenly hollowed out. She closed her eyes and let herself feel it, just for a moment. The ache, the guilt, the rawness that still hadn't healed. A sharp, frantic whinny broke her reverie. Maya snapped her head up, heart hammering. Shadow was at the far end of the paddock, head high, eyes wild, staring into the woods. Without thinking, Maya dropped her journal and rushed outside, rain now pelting her shoulders. She followed Shadow's line of sight, scanning the tree line for any sign of danger. Her thoughts raced. Coyote? Loose dog? Emma? At that moment, Emma's shrill voice pierced the air. "Mom, over here!" Maya's stomach dropped. She sprinted, feet sliding on slick grass, rain stinging her face. Shadow, ignoring the storm, thundered along the fence line, muscles bunching and releasing with every stride. He let out a hoarse, urgent call. Emma appeared, pushing through the brambles, panting, her hair tangled and soaked. In her hand, she clutched a dirty, torn saddle pad. Maya skidded to a stop, eyes wide. "Emma, are you okay?" Emma nodded, breathless. "I saw Shadow. He was staring, so I followed. This was stuffed in the bushes." She held up the saddle pad, its faded colors marred by mud and something darker, blood maybe, or old sweat. Maya took it, her hands shaking. She turned it over and spotted a logo stitched into the corner. A snarling bull, surrounded by a ring of flames, and the words, "Lightning Circuit Rodeo." She froze. She'd read about the Lightning Circuit, a notorious traveling rodeo that made headlines a year ago when it was shut down for cruelty allegations. Overworked horses, hidden injuries, animals vanishing without a trace. A knot formed in Maya's stomach. She ran her fingers over the torn pad, images of frightened horses and midnight escapes flashing in her mind. "He ran from them," Maya whispered, half to herself, half to Shadow, who stood trembling, his eyes fixed on the pad. "He got away, or someone set him free." She remembered the whip scars, the haunted look in his eyes. She realized this was no ordinary lost animal. Shadow had survived something violent, something that explained both his terror and his refusal to be caught. Rain pounded harder, drowning out her thoughts. Maya knelt in the grass, the storm soaking through her clothes. Grief rose in her throat, sharp as the day Raven died. It was too much. The old pain, the new fear, the helplessness that never seemed to leave. She pressed her forehead to her knees, breath coming fast. She felt a warm, gentle nudge at her shoulder. Shadow had crossed the paddock and now stood beside her, huge and steady despite the shaking in his legs. He lowered his head and nuzzled her hand, grounding her in the present. The touch was tentative, almost reverent, a horse's quiet way of saying, "I'm here. I see you." Emma knelt beside Maya, wrapping her arms around her mother's shoulders. For a moment, the three of them, woman, child, horse, huddled together in the rain, grief and love mingling, something old and broken giving way to something fragile and new. Slowly, Maya stood, holding the saddle pad tight. She met Shadow's gaze. "You're safe now, I swear it." The horse blinked, ears flicking, as if he believed her. They hurried back to the barn as lightning slashed the sky, thunder rolling in waves. Maya stripped off their wet clothes, hung Emma's jacket by the stove, and set the muddy saddle pad on the workbench. She turned it over in her hands, jaw set. She wouldn't let the past claim Shadow, not now, not ever. Emma grew quiet as she listened, absorbing every detail. For a moment, Maya worried her daughter would lose hope, that she'd realize Shadow might have been running from something, not toward them. But Emma surprised her, standing a little taller, determination flickering in her eyes. "We're not giving up on him," she said softly. He found us for a reason. Later, as the rain began to fall, Maya and Emma took shelter under the park's old willow. From where they stood, Maya could see the exact spot where she'd first found Shadow, the grass still pressed flat from his collapse. A cold shiver worked its way up her spine, the memory raw, the echo of panic and helplessness too close for comfort. She glanced at Emma, then back at the empty bench that had witnessed so much. On the walk home, Maya's thoughts drifted. She saw her own yearning reflected in Shadow's anxious glances. The horse was healing, yes, but he was still haunted, still searching for someone or something that wasn't coming back. In the barn that night, as Emma filled Shadow's water bucket, Maya sat on the step just outside the stall, knees drawn to her chest. She watched as Shadow stood motionless at the paddock's far end, staring into the twilight, his silhouette framed against the fading light. She pulled her old journal from her coat pocket, thumbing through the pages, her father's neat handwriting filling every line with small, practical wisdom. Some wounds never close, May. That's okay. The important thing is, you don't walk alone. She blinked away tears, clutching the journal like a lifeline. Shadow wandered back from the fence and stopped in front of Maya, lowering his head until his breath stirred the loose pages of her notebook. She reached up, running her hand gently along his jaw. "I miss her too, you know," Maya whispered, "but I think she'd want me to help you. I think Dad would too." Emma joined her, arms full of fresh hay, her cheeks pink from the cold. "He likes it when you talk to him," she said. "He listens better than most people." The two of them laughed quietly, the sound bouncing off the old wood walls. That night, a thunderstorm rolled over the city. Maya sat up in bed, restless, listening to the distant rumble and the sharp patter of rain on the roof. She thought about Shadow, wondered if the noise frightened him, if memories of whatever he'd fled still haunted his dreams. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and tiptoed outside, rain soaking her slippers as she crept toward the barn. Inside, Shadow was pacing, eyes wide, ears swiveling with every crack of thunder. Maya moved slowly, singing an old lullaby her father used to hum, her voice unsteady but soft. The horse stopped pacing, sides heaving, and watched her. She kept singing, heart pounding, until at last he let out a long, tired sigh and pressed his nose into her chest, searching for comfort. For a long time, Maya simply stood there, one hand on Shadow's mane, the other clutching the memory of her father and her lost mare. She realized then that grief wasn't something to be outrun or buried. It was something to be carried, transformed by acts of compassion, the small and steady gestures that made loving and losing bearable. In the days that followed, Maya noticed subtle changes. Shadow no longer lingered at the paddock's edge, waiting for someone to return. Instead, he began to seek out Maya and Emma, pressing closer each time, learning the sound of their voices, the rhythm of their days. Emma hung a small bell by his stall so he could ring for company, a game that delighted both girl and horse. Together they faced the world, three souls with scars that ran deep, learning that healing was not forgetting, but remembering in a way that built something new. In Shadow's anxious glances, Maya found the courage to face her own emptiness. In Emma's laughter, she rediscovered hope. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, Maya stood beside Shadow in the quiet of the paddock. She stroked his neck, feeling the pulse of life beneath her hand, and whispered, "We're still here, all of us." Shadow flicked his ears and pressed closer, the past loosening its hold, the present shining bright and undeniable. And somewhere in the distance, as the last rays of daylight faded, The echoes of Raven's memory mingled with the beating hearts of those still trying, still daring, to love again. A storm was brewing on the edge of the city, thick clouds bunching low and gray above the barn, their bellies already leaking fine threads of drizzle across the Turner property. The air felt heavier than usual, electric, as if holding its breath. Inside, Maya sat on the porch, journal balanced on her knees. It was the first time she'd dared to open its pages since her father's death, and the simple act of holding the pen felt like balancing on the edge of a cliff. Gradually, the others began to call him Shadow. It started as a slip, Emma brushing his mane, saying, "Easy, Shadow," as if the name had always belonged to him. Sarah wrote it on the whiteboard by the kitchen. Feed Shadow, AM and PM in blue marker, underlined twice. Even Dr. Carson picked it up, greeting the horse with a "Hey there, Shadow. Looking better today, aren't you?" The name stuck, soft, dark, and solid, like the animal himself. For Maya, naming the horse felt both like an act of hope and a quiet surrender. Giving him a name meant letting him in, inviting the possibility of loss all over again. But Shadow, patient and persistent, seemed to draw the whole family closer, weaving them into a new rhythm that didn't erase pain but dulled its edge. Late one afternoon, as golden light painted the paddock, Emma raced home from school, cheeks flushed. She burst through the barn doors, waving a flyer she'd made. "Missing horse. Please call if you know him." She'd drawn a rough, childlike sketch of Shadow. Big black eyes, wind-blown mane. Maya helped her hang the flyers at the park, on lampposts, even at the corner store. As they walked home, Emma squeezed Maya's hand. "I kind of hope no one calls," she whispered. "He's ours, right?" Maya hesitated, searching Emma's face for disappointment, hope, and fear tangled together. "Maybe," Maya said softly. "He's here to help us remember that loving something, even if it hurts, is still worth it." Back at the barn, Shadow waited at the gate, his silhouette stretched long in the fading sun. Emma rushed to his side, arms thrown around his neck, laughing when he snuffled her hair. Maya stood back, heart aching in a way that felt strangely good, like breathing for the first time after months of holding it in. That night, Maya brushed Shadow's mane, fingers gentle and slow. "We'll never really forget them, will we?" she whispered. "Not Raven, not Dad. But maybe with you, we learn how to keep going." Shadow nudged the old lead rope at her feet, then pressed his nose into Maya's palm, a silent gesture of trust. The barn, for all its emptiness, felt full for the first time in a year. And so, with every quiet morning, every apple slice, every whispered secret, the horse called Shadow became more than just a stray. They became a family learning how to heal together, one day at a time. The days began to pass in a gentle blur, each morning brighter, each evening stretched out in slow, healing rhythms. Maya found herself almost looking forward to the small routines that had grown around Shadow, measuring his feed, tracking his steps as he limped but then grew stronger, the quiet moments of brushing his coat beneath shafts of golden light that poured through the barn windows. Spring's promise was everywhere. Blossoms lining the neighborhood streets, robins flitting through the park, the air warming just enough that Maya sometimes left the barn doors open, letting in the world she'd tried so hard to keep at bay. But every so often, grief would twist through her, sharp and sudden, like a stone in her shoe. Some mornings, as she walked past the old, unused tack hanging by the barn wall, she would remember Raven, the sturdy black mare with the gentle eyes, her late father's favorite. Raven's saddle still hung on its hook, dust gathering in the worn creases of leather, as if waiting for a ride that would never come. Maya would run her fingers over the tooled designs and feel the absence pulse inside her. Shadow, too, seemed to sense the shadows of loss in this place. Some nights he would stand motionless at the far end of the paddock, head lifted, nostrils wide, as if listening for something only he could hear. After nearly 2 weeks with no word from any owner, no calls in response to the flyers, no social media posts claiming him, Maya and Emma decided to double their efforts. One gray Saturday morning, with clouds threatening rain, they loaded a stack of fresh flyers into Emma's backpack and set out for Freedom Park. Emma rode her bike, the basket stuffed with tape and thumbtacks, while Maya followed on foot, her hands deep in the pockets of her jacket. They moved slowly through the mist, hanging signs on lampposts, benches, and community boards. Emma's flyer, now printed in bold letters, read, "Found, Black Stallion, no brand, found in Freedom Park. Call if you know his owner." A shaky drawing of Shadow, all wild mane and big haunted eyes, gave the paper a heartbreakingly personal touch. As they worked, neighbors stopped to ask questions. An older woman with a golden retriever recalled seeing the black horse near the park's edge almost every morning for a week, always just out of reach, skittish and quick to vanish. "He looked scared," she said, frowning. "Poor thing. I figured someone would come for him." A jogger in a UNC hoodie chimed in. "Saw him by the creek a couple times. Thought he belonged to the city or something."